Go ahead and call this special assembly meeting to order. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Ms. Zolotow. Here. Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Ms. LaFrance. Here. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Perez Verdilla.
Here.
Mr. Dyson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Pledge of Allegiance. Bree, could you come up and do the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, so we have one item on our agenda today for a public hearing. We have before us item 4A, resolution number AR 2019-387, a resolution approving the stipulation resolving all issues before the Regulatory Commission of Alaska in dockets U-9-020 and U-19-021, petitions filed by Chugach Electric Association, Inc. and Municipality of Anchorage, DBA Municipal Light and Power Department for RCA approval of the sale of the assets of MLNP to Chugach Department of Law. Public hearing is now open on this item. Would anyone like to testify? Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Assembly, my name is Tom McGrath. I've been supportive of the sale of MLNP to Chugach Electric since it was first talked about. Congratulations on shepherding this complex issue to fruition. I do have one objection to your terms. Even though Anchorage needs a substance abuse disorder treatment center, it has no part in the issue of selling a utility. If money is going to be raised to build a treatment center, it should not be hidden in the document, which has been available to the public for a very short period of time. The issue of building a treatment center owned by the municipality or owned by Anchorage deserves public dialogue. I believe a center needs to be built and operated by a nonprofit. As we have seen with API, a government entity owning and operating a treatment facility is not an efficient way to proceed. If you approve this document with terms with term 4 included, I would hope a group or individuals comes forth with a lawsuit to separate this issue from this procedure. As I said before, Anchorage needs a substance abuse treatment center, but I firmly believe that the municipality of Anchorage should not own or operate it. If we were to own and operate such a facility, it should only be with community dialogue and with the vote of the electorate. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Dyson?
Yeah. It seems to me under our forms of government that what are the principle that we ought to reject the government owning people voting on it? What is the principle that we should be following to do that?
I think a substance abuse treatment center is kind of like a utility, or like a major building that we would build. And I've heard numbers of $50 million. You know, the total amount that would be spent on such a facility. When we build a building like that, or if we sell a utility, in code it says that the voters weigh in. And if we're going to spend that amount of money or reserve a portion of that amount of money by this action, if you asked any number of people on the street today in Anchorage, I'll bet that 99.99% of the people in Anchorage don't know this meeting's happening. And they don't know that they might be on the hook for the operation and maintenance of a facility for the rest of their lives. And an expensive facility. And if you look at the different public buildings that we built over the years, or schools, it's a bond issue. People vote and say, yes, we want to do this. But here, there's no opportunity, and then the rest of the agreement, I don't have a problem with. But this is kind of being slid in. And what really got me thinking about this is, when we voted on the alcohol tax just a few months ago, people said no. And one of the issues was we should build a treatment facility with that money. And people said no. So maybe that was the reason they said no, maybe it wasn't. But we should have a say.
Yep. And did you say in your testimony that you didn't want the government to run the facility?
Oh, absolutely. Every time the government runs a facility like that, it fails. Or it becomes very, very expensive.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Thank you for your testimony. Would anyone else like to testify? Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Dimitri Shane. I'm here on behalf of Alaska Electric Vehicle Association. We are a nonprofit, and we advocate for the interest of electric vehicle owners here in Alaska, and our general mission is to advance adoption of electric vehicle infrastructure. Anchorage is one of the few cities in the nation that is not electric vehicle ready. It's not EV ready. Anchorage does not have fast charging infrastructure in place to allow commuting for electric vehicles. And that's pretty much contrary to the climate action plan the city has adopted. As we all know, more than half of greenhouse gases and emissions are produced by combustion vehicles. So the city of Anchorage should, move forward with implementing tangible steps that allow installation of fast charging in Alaska. A major part of what's preventing installation of fast charging here in Anchorage are demand charges that are charged by Chugach Electric and the MLMP. For example, Tesla has been in town visiting, and they've been serving and trying to install a supercharger. And just to give you an idea, it would cost, for 15 minutes of supercharging at a Tesla supercharger, it would cost $10,000 per month. For just 15 minutes per month, $10,000. So it's very difficult to make a case for a business like Tesla coming to Anchorage and installing their supercharger network here in Anchorage. So I would strongly encourage, and Anchorage and Alaska in general is about 10 years behind states like Hawaii, who have acted to implement demand charge holidays and who have acted to actually suspend demand charges for fast charging. So I would ask all Assembly members to meet with Chugach Electric and MLMP to look for a solution to this problem and to make sure that the city is moving towards implementing the climate action plan, because I think we all notice the weather outside today. It's very warm and continues to be warmer. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Would anyone else like to testify? Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Tony Izzo. I'm an Anchorage property owner, and I'm the CEO of Matanuska Electric Association based in Palmer. I'm here tonight to express my strong support for passing of this resolution. Back on January 9th of 2018, this body passed unanimously AR number 2018-21, and it's a resolution of the Anchorage Assembly stating expectations for Chugach Electric to work with MEA to ensure MEA customers within the municipality of Anchorage benefit from the cost savings in addition to power reliability as CEA proceeds with steps to purchase municipal light and power. I'm here to testify that in addition to that Chugach has certainly done that. So has the municipality. Section 2 of the resolution simply reads, the Anchorage Assembly expects CEA to act in good faith to continue the current progress that has been made by MLMP, Chugach Electric, and MEA to facilitate cost savings through coordination of planning of generation resources, as well as development of and enforcement of reliability standards. I think the best partner in terms of synergies that MEA could have would be the combined MLMP and Chugach Electric. So we're, again, very much supportive. We're appreciative of your support with the resolution to ensure that the benefits went beyond utility service lines and encompassed all of the municipality of Anchorage. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for you. Mr. Constant.
Actually, I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Izzo, over here.
Yes.
I just wanted to say thank you. I recall your letter coming in kind of close to the last part of the conversation when we were looking at the terms for the various potential bidders. And I know it was a warm conversation, and looking forward to now from then. It sounds like a lot of progress has been made, so I just want to express my thanks to MEA for their support.
I appreciate it.
Mr. Dyson.
Senator?
I'm delighted that you are comfortable with what's happened. And is it logical to infer that the issues that you raised with me nearly 2 years ago or whatever, that those have all been resolved to your satisfaction?
Assemblyman Dyson, the answer is absolutely yes. What we have found is that we believe there is a faster way to get to the benefits of working together, sharing fuel supply, sharing generation resources, that it's much simpler between two parties that have very different assets than mixing it with three. And honestly, the third is a political subdivision of the city. And not that it's a topic I want to bring up, but I will say from having 39 years or so in the utility business, working for some investor-owns, working for a cooperative, there's something to be said for it all being under one umbrella.
Yeah, so the issue of MEA being taken advantage on the wheeling charges is not going to happen anymore?
I don't believe it will. In fact, my board is very supportive. We believe that should the Regulatory Commission approve this, and again, we're very supportive of that it resolves generational, decades-old disputes that frankly don't belong in the business anymore.
Thank you. Do you think that here in South Central we have more generating capacity than we need?
Assemblyman, I would say no. I'd qualify that, though, in terms of generation that is, lived beyond its useful life, is there for emergency purposes. As I mentioned, I've spent a few decades in this business. Half of it was outside. And outside we had redundancy. We had much more redundancy than we have here. And the November 30th earthquake really brings it home for me. All it takes is one pipeline to go down, one transmission line, one road, one bridge. We live in a more fragile, challenging environment than I would say any other state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more question. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Izzo, thank you. My understanding from this agreement, and a lot of us are still digesting it, is that you will have certain rights over the power generated from the Eklutna plant. Is that correct?
That's through an arrangement we negotiated with the municipality, yes.
So, my question is, there's an active conversation, and we've had it, you and I have had it personally, about the necessity of restoring the Eklutna River. And to do that, we're going to reduce the amount of water that runs through that plant at some point in the future, and thus reduce the power that is generated there. What do you see as MEA's role in that process?
Well, MEA is currently and will be in the future a part owner with our 16.7% share, and then there will be the pro rata share that we've negotiated successfully with the municipality to purchase under a power purchase agreement for 35 some years. We will be I think the simple answer to your question is that we'll be a participant, a stakeholder, irregardless. I would go further to say that we're very pleased with the negotiated arrangement with the municipality in that it makes us somewhat neutral to whether it's increased water is needed to serve public drinking water needs, or should the result of the study that we've started a couple of years early results in water being released for another purpose. So economically, we're neutral, and I think that's as far as I could speculate at this point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Would anyone else like to testify? Welcome.
My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I represent myself. I live in the Mat-Su Valley. Follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, the decision made by the governing body is more likely the public interest. I'd like to first say words that you not expect out of me. What we have here is a situation of a larger monopoly, a monopoly of a power entity. Power entity that exists dealing with what? A merger, and then debt gets transferred, and that debt still exists. There's money moved over to Anchorage, but then that debt is being faced by the users of that power. That's what's happened. And you have another word, antitrust. Years ago, something like this would be seriously in question and would not be allowed. Why? Monopolies are not good. Antitrust is not good. And that's what's happened here. I see greed going on. By example, the meeting I attended today with the Assembly, and on the agenda, what the public couldn't see until coming to the meeting, the last item was dealing with this. And there was words said by Assemblymember Constant that we need to move on this because we got a budget to approve. Many of the Assembly members here were left early. But we have to approve a budget, and we got to get this done before so we can get that money. And during that same meeting, there was the entity of what that money was and debts that exist, school bonds and other things, and how we're going to spend it. But what you have done today is what? Process. You announced this meeting yesterday, and you're going to decide this meeting today. No fair chance for the public to be involved. And I close with this. During the election time, what happened? Town hall meeting here, utilities like Chugach, Municipal Power, and Mayor and Stools. In the beginning of the meeting was the situation where the public was told, you can only ask questions. That's it. And I said these words, why don't you have enough faith in your proposal to allow for the public to get this information way in advance and allow for the public to comment and not just question. And that's what it's all about. You do not have faith in this proposal. You want to rush this through and throw the problem somewhere else. But it's not leaving here. It's still here among the same people with that debt. And that is not a stable economic situation for the people involved. You're moving into that money, and the end result, an unstable situation, and this needs to be stopped now. Thank you. And you should not decide on this issue tonight. You need to keep it open. There are a lot of papers here, and you only allowed what? Notice yesterday. Thank you. With 2 seconds to spare.
Thank you for your testimony. Would anyone else like to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, public testimony is closed. What is the will of the body?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Before I go into the queue, I would like to ask Ms. Wint Pearson to walk us briefly through the stipulation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as an initial matter, here with me tonight are Dean Thompson, our regulatory counsel with Kemple, Huffman & Ellis, and John Reed, our expert advisor with Concentric Energy Advisors. We can hopefully answer any of the more nuanced questions you have. I want to initially thank you very much for your availability on such a short notice basis. generally speaking, settlements and at the RCA or otherwise are executed or approved by the municipal manager or the municipal attorney without input from the Assembly, precisely because they move extremely quickly. This is an extraordinary process because it is such a high consequence transaction for the municipality where we, as you know, we've built in multiple additional layers of review over and above what we usually have. That does necessitate calling this body together on relatively quick notice in order to be part of this settlement process. And again, I really appreciate your time on the short notice and trust that you can answer questions from your constituents that I know will admittedly come up after this meeting. In terms of what you have in front of you, the resolution lays out the process that has happened with this transaction in short summary from the very outset. You'll recall that in January of 2018, this body passed 2018-1S, sending the question to the voters of whether or not to approve this transaction. That ballot proposition was approved by 65.08% of the voters. There were four, essentially what I've termed as the sacred pieces of the deal that were approved by the voters. Took payment of competitive value of approximately $1 billion, no increase in taxes, no increase in base rates, and no lost jobs as a result of the transaction. We then spent months and months and months negotiating what that really meant on paper for a complex transaction of this matter. And we reached agreement on final terms of a $1.9 billion deal in December of 2018, which was approved by this body subject to potential amendment. And with the clear caveat when we discussed that any change in purchase price would come back to this body for approval. And so then, since then, effectively, we have been part of the RCA process. We filed early last spring for various approvals that are required to make this transaction happen. We've been in hearings in front of the RCA since mid-August. And we have, through negotiation with all of the parties to the transaction except for the ratepayer advocate section of the AG's office. So specifically with Chugach Electric, Providence Health and Services, the federal executive agencies representing Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, Matanuska Electric Association, the Alaska Energy Authority, and NSTAR Natural Gas, we've reached agreement on the terms that you now have in front of you. The summary of those terms, there are a number of terms clearly embodied in this stipulation. Some I think are of greater importance for this body's consideration than others. Specifically, I think the most important are the first four on this list, which involve the monetary terms of the deal for the municipality. When we entered into this transaction, we projected a net book value of the assets of ML&P at closing of $740 million. That's what we predicted. That's what we represented to Chugach when we entered into the agreement to sell the assets. At this point, we're looking at a projected net book value at close that's closer to $715 million for a variety of reasons. It's not that anything extraordinary has happened. It's just how things have shaken out. You could argue we made a really good deal and should run off with the proceeds, but what we've agreed to, because the residents of Anchorage effectively sit on both sides of this transaction as ratepayers and of the combined utility and as taxpayers of the municipality, we agreed to two terms that adjust the purchase price of the deal. One is a blanket purchase price reduction of $10 million, and the other is a ratchet whereby if the net book value of the assets come in below 715.4 at closing, we'll agree to a dollar-for-dollar reduction. So to the extent we don't hit that point, we'll agree to additional reduction depending on what the net book value is as of close. And again, that's to really to align the price slightly more realistically with what the net book value will be at closing. And then we've agreed to the creation of a restricted rate reduction account there's currently unrestricted cash on the books of the utility, a portion of which we've agreed to turn into a restricted account pre-close, and then per the terms of the deal, all restricted accounts go to Chugach. So this would go to Chugach. It will mean immediate rate relief for legacy ML&P customers or customers within the legacy ML&P service territory after closing that will be spread out over the first years post-close. We've also agreed to the dedication of $15 million by the municipality to an Alaska Center for Treatment. And a few notes about that. I just want to make clear that this is by no means the end of the public process around that idea. The agreement here is simply that we have said the money will go, $15 million will go toward this idea, this project, or else it will become an offset to payments under this deal after 5 years. So it'll either go toward further rate relief for customers, or it will be expended by the municipality for some iteration of an Alaska Center for Treatment. What that will look like will involve multiple layers of public process. To the extent that this body determines you'd like to site that on public land, the municipal code calls for a public facility site selection process, which involves multiple layers of public hearings about whether or not a new municipally owned facility should be built, what piece of property a municipally owned facility should be built on. If it is elected, if the decision is that it should be built on an existing piece of municipal land, there will be another round of public process around contracting. The municipality is not equipped to operate a substance misuse treatment facility, so presumably a contractor would be hired, which would be subject to Title VII requirements for RFPs, public process around who that contractor might be pursuant to a competitive process. So I do just want to make very abundantly clear that this is an initial first stage agreement that some portion of the unrestricted cash may be dedicated to this project, and the description of the project is fairly general in the settlement, in the stipulation agreement, allowing for some flexibility in programming, operations, and location, entirely dependent on the public process that will inevitably follow related to this project. There is also a provision in the stipulation requiring post-closing reporting on the achievement of savings by Chugach Electric. Chugach will present their annual reports on how they're achieving the savings that's projected as part of this deal that will benefit all of us for further transparency into the progress on what we hope to achieve out of this deal for all ratepayers of the combined utility. Providence has agreed as part of this stipulation to dismiss its ongoing appeal or effectively withdraw from its ongoing appeal of dockets U16094 and U17008, which are regarding the prudence of the original construction of ML&P's Plant 2A and ML&P's approved rate of return on equity. There is a resolution in the stipulation regarding how the ML&P share of the Beluga River gas production will be used post-closing. It's a specific requirement that the ML&P and Chugach legacy shares of that gas field be accounted for separately for the benefit of each of those separate ratepayers, the Chugach legacy ratepayers and the ML&P legacy ratepayers. There are some restrictions on post-closing amortization of transaction costs by Chugach Electric, and then there are a series of corresponding amendments to the transaction documents that basically just give life to these different provisions of the stipulation. To the extent there are more nuanced questions about any provision of the stipulation, I'm here to answer any of those questions. Mr. Thompson, Mr. Reed are also here to answer any questions. I know there are representatives from Chugach Electric in the audience, and I think we all stand ready to give you whatever information you might want tonight in order to make an informed decision on this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have kind of a number of items that I would like to go through right now. But first, I would like to invite Chugach Electric, Lee Thiebert, to come up and give us any comments he would like. And just a show of hands, is there anyone here from Providence or any of the other parties to the stipulation, other than Mr. Izzo, who's already spoken? Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Well, good evening. We really appreciate the opportunity to make some brief statements about the stipulation. Obviously, Chugach does support the stipulation as we're signatory. The Chugach Board of Directors did approve the stipulation settlement last Thursday, October 24th, and they did that unanimously. So they really felt, and they were very involved in the process, and feel this is a very good deal for our ratepayers, our members in Anchorage. We are really pleased to be at this point in the acquisition. And if you go back and we talk about public process, we've been at a hearing since mid-August. We spent 3 days specifically on the Beluga River unit issues, and then we had 3 weeks of hearings on this acquisition itself. So there's been a very, very extensive public process with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, and I will tell you, as being involved in regulatory processes, that there has probably not been a stone that's been unturned in this process, and there's probably been more paperwork, more runs of how this thing works out for members in the long run. So I think it's been a very, very rigorous process. So I think you can be very proud of the MLMP team. The Regulatory Commission of Alaska has really done an excellent job, and the interveners have all been really questioning, and so I think this resolution really does provide a good process. The settlement represents a good work and cooperation again amongst the parties. By working this out in a non-adversarial setting, we're able to find common ground, sort of some of the contested issues, and when you're trying to deal with this through basically a legal process, it becomes very difficult. So getting behind the scenes and getting this done, I think really, really helped get to a fair and reasonable settlement. This saves all the parties valuable time and money getting to closer decision from the RCA. And I want to add that throughout this process, we have kept our focus on 3 primary things. And I think I've talked about this with this assembly and in a number of presentations we've made. This has to be good for this community. This has to be good for the employees of the organizations, and this has to be good for the member ratepayers. And I really believe that all of those issues are taken care of through this settlement process. We have not lost sight of these principles, and that's something that we really keep in our heart and make sure that everything we do meets those 3 criteria. I'd like to thank all the employees of Chugach, MLMP, and the support of the IBEW in this process. We really can't forget that we are, changing the lives of a lot of people, and they've been going through change for a couple of years now, and I really owe it to them because they are really what makes the organizations work. They're the ones that have worked together to try to figure out how to put 2 organizations together to be a stronger utility at the end of the day. So I really thank all of the employees for what they've been going through, and we're not quite there yet. We have a lot of work to go, but I really appreciate their efforts. We are also pleased, and Mr. Izzo reported earlier, that we did arrive at an agreement with MEA, and it does resolve the issues that they had early on, so we did come up with a resolution for that. And, although we have a long way to go, and we've done it over the past 2 years, we aren't quite finished. Starting tomorrow, we start back up with the Regulatory Commission process, and it will be dealing with just the stipulation only, and that will be the focus of the hearing, and we anticipate that will go for the next, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks, so there's way more public process to go. It's been a great deal of work, and we appreciate the attention and focus of the public with the Assembly and with our Board of Directors. We are looking forward to resume proceedings tomorrow and having the opportunity to keep making excellent progress. So anyway, we do appreciate the Assembly's support, and I'd love to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Chair. Yep. So I have 2, we heard somebody testify tonight very narrowly on the topic of renewable energy, and I've heard some concerns from the public that perhaps under the Chugach paradigm, that won't be a priority, not specifically one version, but generally speaking, moving towards different energy systems. So I'd love to hear some thoughts about that. And then if you can, I don't know if you can, but can you describe for us how the treatment campus came to be in the conversation?
I'll take that in 2 steps. Yep. First of all, Electric vehicles and charging stations are very a high priority for Chugach. We've done an RFP in the community to try to come up with level 2 chargers. We've been providing grants to different businesses, and we put out information. We just completed one down in Alyeska. So we did a grant with them, and we're working towards having level 2 chargers. We are working with the Alaska Energy Authority and the other utilities within the rail belt for the super fast chargers. And there are grant funds that we think will be available, and that's something we want to work on. But I think Chugach is very much in favor of working on the charging system because it's really basic in trying to get electric vehicles within the territory. And I agree that the demand charge is an issue, so I think if we ever have time at the commission to deal with other than this project, we will be looking at making some modifications in our tariff to come up with a special rate for electric charging. So it is
Before
something.
you proceed,
Go ahead.
Ms. Wint Pearson got in the queue. I don't know, Mr. Chair, she might want to stop something.
Sure.
Through the chair, I can speak to the question about how the treatment center came up in the negotiation. I imagine potentially better than Mr. Thiebert because he was not part of the initial conversation when it came up.
Okay.
So I wanted to volunteer to answer that question before you
Lifetime.
subject poorly to it.
Yep.
I very much appreciate that.
Thank you. So, yeah.
We can go ahead, skip in the queue.
Okay.
Ms. Wint Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To that question, there was during the proceeding, there were some questions from interveners and from the commission about what type of community benefit was going to result from the residual unrestricted cash that the utility holds. Essentially, there were some questions and intimations about, what is the municipality going to do with this money? Is it going to be something that actually benefits the community? Should it not simply go back to ratepayers because right now it is held in an account which was gleaned from ratepayer payments over time for their electrical bills, basically. And so we are trying to find a creative solution to assure the interveners, to assure everyone in the room that money would be spent on something which is an undisputed priority for all community members, for business owners in the municipality. It's something that is essentially on the top of our list of something that needs a capital investment in order to happen. This is not entirely uncommon in utility transactions. So I wanted to ask Mr. Reed, who's worked on utility transactions across the country, to comment a little bit on community benefit projects and the idea of a community benefit project being part of a utility sale in general.
Yes, and just in general, it's frequent that you see commitments both by the seller and by the buyer in these transactions to fund initiatives that are of interest to the community. They can be charitable activities, they can be environmental activities, they can be economic development activities, and many other causes. So, as part of the transaction approval process, the issue is always before the regulator as to whether the transaction is in the public interest. Those kinds of considerations, how it affects the broader community and the broader set of stakeholders, frequently comes up, and these types of commitments often accompany a transaction and a use of the proceeds that are pledged in that transaction.
Just a quick follow-up. Then, are you suggesting that this was a municipal proposal, or was this a proposal of an intervener?
Through the chair, the idea of a community benefit project that addressed the question of substance misuse and behavioral health was something that was floated in conversations with Providence Health and Services. But I think it was the type of classic win-win term you like to see as an attorney in settlement negotiations, because it was something that we have clearly identified as a priority capital investment project in the past as well, and this was an opportunity to find that synergy and make, frankly, a deal that makes this move forward for the benefit of the entire community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, and a credit to the chair for perfectly timing the discussion to my question. On this thing, this says we'll put $15 million towards it, but it doesn't commit us to run it. It doesn't commit us to being the majority owner of it. It doesn't. I mean, we're really just saying we got $15 million. We're going to push this forward with it. that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's exactly right. There is a description in the stipulation that says right now the idea is probably, quite frankly, the Clitheroe site makes the most sense because that's where substance misuse treatment occurs in our community right now. It's an existing municipally owned piece of land where we wouldn't have neighbor concerns about development of a center of this sort. But that's not something that we're bound to in this, and we're certainly not bound to operate it. We're bound to, or even to own it. We're bound to dedicate $15 million to the planning, design, any kind of, permitting, tear down of existing facility, capital construction costs of a center that does some combination of residential and non-residential substance misuse and related behavioral health disorder treatment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 2 questions, actually, for Ms. Wint-Pearson. On the $15 million for the treatment center, will that go into an escrow account?
Through the chair, I think that what we have contemplated is potentially proposing a restricted account right off the bat under Title VI, where we'd put the money and have it managed by our municipal finance department to make sure that it accrues interest and grows before it is appropriated. Some portion of it may be appropriated fairly immediately because we'd like to move forward with this project and want to start looking at site selection and what possibilities there are. But the plan would be to try and turn that money, have that money earn money while it's not, before it is definitively appropriated to this project.
Thanks, and if I may, second question. And so just a quick question about the process. Did I understand correctly that Assembly approval is not required for the administration to move forward? And that we are doing this just to have a full public process?
Through the chair, no, I think that's incorrect. We would not move forward with this if this body does not approve this resolution tonight. I think that this is a novel process. I don't think that the code dictates that Assembly approval is necessary, what form that should take for this type of transaction. Generally speaking, settlements are made by the authority of the municipal manager. That said, we created a new process out of whole cloth to do this utility transaction. We created a new section of the charter, and we went through the ordinance process. And my look at the legislative history of that ordinance was that we represented in that process that no change should be made to the fundamental tenets of the financial pieces of the deal, including the purchase price, without the approval of this body. And so we are here tonight asking for this body's approval in order to proceed with this stipulation.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. LaFrance perfectly asked the first question I was going to ask, which is about where the $15 million lives until such time as we appropriate it. And I'm satisfied with that answer. I think it's a good plan. My question for Mr. Thiebert is, can you try to explain in as plain as English as possible how NSTAR is impacted by this stipulation with regard to the Beluga River unit? And I guess by the whole transaction, are they going to be in a different position after this stipulation versus before the sale went through?
Okay, I believe their primary interest was in the Beluga River unit field gas. And what they perceive right now is there's very few players in the gas industry. I think Hilcorp is the primary supplier of natural gas in Cook Inlet. ML&P has a fairly large, share of gas, and they have purchased gas from ML&P in the past. ML&P also sold gas in combination with Economy Energy sales to Golden Valley Electric Association. So the concern from NSTAR was that with Chugach acquiring these facilities, we have made statements that we do not believe there's going to be excess gas to sell or excess gas to sell to Golden Valley. And the gas that's left is basically going to be used primarily, number one, for ML&P legacy ratepayers, and if there was anything left, they would go towards Chugach customers. We believe, based on the reserve studies that we've seen in the last 6 months, that the reserves, when we originally looked at this, were out in 2033, and now it looks like those reserves might be pushed out into 2037 or 2038. And that's some of the discussion that we had with how much gas should be reserved for MLMP legacy customers and for how long. So really we came up with a concept that it was for the life of the field, because there's been arguments about when that might be. But I think to answer your question as specific as I can, NSTAR was really concerned that they would not have the opportunity to buy natural gas from Chugach if it was available. So the deal we struck is that they would be able to basically purchase that gas at market prices if it was competitive. And we could also make economy energy sales with purchased gas, like Chugach does today. We'll make economy energy sales. We'll buy the gas from one of the producers, such as Hilcorp, and make that sale to Golden Valley.
Can I ask a quick follow-up to that, Mr. Chair? So on page, I guess there's not pages here. Oh, page 11 of 26, where it talks about NSTAR and BRU. So I guess it's the economy energy sales I need a little more clarification on, because it says each time Chugach elects to use gas source from either the legacy Chugach BRU interest or the legacy MLMP BRU interest to generate electricity for economy energy sales, it shall also offer those same BRU natural gas volumes to NSTAR for purchase. So it sounds to me almost like they have a right of first refusal. If you're going to use it, they get to purchase it. Am I misinterpreting that because of what economy energy sales means?
No, you're absolutely right. First off, we don't believe there's going to be any gas that's used to make economy energy sales to Golden Valley. But in the case there are, it doesn't make any difference to us. We can still make the sale to Golden Valley by purchasing gas on the market. And if NSTAR wants to buy gas, say they can't get gas for the same price we can get it from NSTAR, they could buy it from Chugach at a market price.
Okay, so it only comes into a play if you were selling it to someone else.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, I'm playing catch up here, but I think a couple of questions. So did I understand the administration to say that the Assembly did not look at all the things we could do with the money we had and pick out the mental health program and so this is a choice the administration made?
Through the chair, this is a proposal for you to consider. If we make this choice, then we're able to reach agreement on a stipulation to settle this transaction, and we have certain other benefits that come with that, which we've outlined for you, including no one will appeal any eventual approval. So I'm saying that we're presenting you with a package that you get to decide on. If you feel like you do not, like that piece of it is a deal killer for you, then I would say don't vote in favor of the resolution. This is the point of making that choice. What we're saying is that this is a package of concessions and projects and proposals and tweaks to the deal that will make it possible for all parties, save at this point again, RAPA is still considering, to agree to move forward with the deal. And like any settlement, it involves some concessions and some commitments and some from each party involved in the transaction. And this is the point where we're asking you whether or not you are willing to have us sign on to that.
Yeah, if I may continue. So it seems to me that you're implying that in negotiations and a case before the RCA, that part of it was we were going to spend this $15 million or whatever it is on mental health treatment?
Through the chair, there were questions raised at the proceeding about how we might spend this money, and we've offered this settlement as an assurance of where it would go, that this is because this is a project that I think everyone in that room can agree is an extremely high priority, if not the highest priority, for addressing the issues that we all hear about constantly in our community. So I'm not sure if I feel like I'm not answering your question, but I guess what I'm saying is this was something that the parties in the room agreed was a priority, wanted to see as a benefit of this transaction, and then could agree to put aside all the other things that are being dropped or compromised on in this deal.
Yeah, so I'm getting more confused. Why the heck is it Chugach's business or the RCA whether we spend money on mental health or not?
Through the chair, as Mr. Reed noted, again, community benefit projects are not uncommon in terms of making clear that the utility sale will have some affirmative benefit for the community, potentially related directly to rates and potentially related to other benefits for the community. So the question was, is this transaction in the best interest of the public? And some of the ratepayers in the room particularly felt like having this made very clear where the money was going helped them feel like it was in the best interest of the public to move forward.
Yeah, that's a good answer. That helps me understand.
Okay.
It's not Chugach's business. It's not Instar's. It's the RCA looking out for the public interest.
Certainly, and also the ratepayers who are in the room representing the interests of the ratepayers as well. So it's a public interest question, not necessarily a will it impact Chugach Electric question.
Yeah. All right. I don't like it, but I understand it, and it's probably the best we could do. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
So, Mr. Thiebert, and also to the negotiators for the administration, I want to express my great thanks for ensuring that the ratepayers in the legacy area's needs and concerns were addressed. It's clear that not only were they addressed, but through the negotiation process that the parties decided that there needed to be a little bit more protection. And for those of you who haven't been following this process, this protects the long-term investments that have been made by those of us who have been ratepayers in the legacy area for a generation. And so I just express deep gratitude to all the parties for ensuring that the needs and the investments of people in that part of town are taken care of.
Thank you. Ms. Salatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions or just need some clarification. I'm looking at page 13 and 14 of the stipulation around when Chugach will ask for its first combined rate case following this transaction. Could you explain to me a little bit about the purpose of the delayed amortization, and then also at the end there on page 14, it talks about Chugach providing and conferring with the settling parties regarding its proposed amortization period prior to the general rate case being filed. It seems like us kind of staying in it maybe a while after we're already done. So I just wanted a little bit to know kind of how we envision it working and then why we're still kind of going to be involved.
Okay. Through the chair, the regulatory process allows taking expenses that are incurred up front and deferring them over a longer period of time. So the cost of integrating the two utilities, the financing cost, there's a lot of upfront costs that if we expensed it in year one, we would not be able to take obviously that to the bottom line. So they create what they call a deferred asset account and expense it over the life of the project, and it could be, and we recommended 30 years. We also took some payments that we were going to make in the first 3 years because we live with the existing rates for the first 3 years until we do a general rate case. And that's when we include all the cost into that rate case. There were concerns by some of the interveners that if we had a lower interest rate and costs were lower, that we could really afford to make some of those payments or accelerate some of the amortization over that shorter period of time. From Chugach's perspective, as long as we have a lower interest rate, we are more than happy to amortize it over a shorter period of time and to make the payments on the PPA in years 1, 2, and 3, as long as we have basically the cash to pay for it. So what we agreed to do is if interest rates were less than 5%, and 5% is the interest rate that we assumed in our modeling, and if it comes up less than 5%, we'd say, yes, we'll go ahead and make the payments to the municipality in years 1, 2, and 3 without amortizing it or without deferring it. And we would try to shorten up, take additional costs and expense them in those first 3 years. And if the interest rates were between, say, 5% and 4%, we would ratchet it appropriately downward. And I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that answered my first question, and maybe the administration can answer my second one.
Through the chair, about why we're still involved or how we're still going to be involved. So for that, I want to make clear that we will remain involved because we're actually going to keep a little mini utility, which I've been calling the stub utility because we're technically selling the name ML&P as part of the deal, because we will continue to have our share of interest in the Eklutna hydroelectric project. As part of this transaction, we're asking to have our service territory effectively fundamentally altered to just be our interest in that hydroelectric project. And so we will continue to be a certificated little mini utility that will report up as a department to the municipal manager. We've not yet determined what makes the most sense for operation of that little mini utility. We'll probably do it through a consultant like we do how we manage our interest in the Beluga River unit currently. I assume that because we will still have this little mini utility operating, that to the extent any consultations are required with our utility over time as a part of the transaction, that we will have that mechanism set up to be able to continue those conversations.
Mr. Chair, if I may, maybe I can clarify a little bit better. Specifically, it says that Chugach shall provide and confer with the settling parties regarding proposed amortization period prior to the general rate case being filed with the commission. Can you explain what that means for the municipality as an ongoing party?
For that, I'll defer to regulatory counsel.
Through the chair, I think what this establishes is that before Chugach's first combined rate case, it will at that time know what the interest rates were, as Mr. Thiebert said, and it will have to decide what amortization period to propose to the RCA. And when it does propose that to the RCA, Chugach's customers, including the municipality of Anchorage, will be a Chugach customer, can go in and either agree with or propose something different from what Chugach has proposed. What this provides is that before Chugach actually proposes something and only interveners get to weigh in on that, they're going to notify all of the settling parties. We've reached that point. We know what the interest rate is. We're 2 or 3 years down the line. This is what we propose and why for the amortization period.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion.
Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I would actually like to make one very small amendment. On page 2, line 50, I would just like to strike the word South Central. And I spoke with Becky about this, with Ms. Wynn-Pearson. It's a small thing, but I believe that this transaction and the Alaska Center, if approved, will have benefits for every person in Alaska because we do serve as a clearinghouse for people who come and go from across the state. And so I would ask someone to second that.
Second.
Thank you. And before we get into that, actually, Ms. Kennedy was in the queue, so I just want to let her go into the question, then we'll get back into deliberation on the amendment. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question might be a little premature because I know we have an item coming up on the agenda next week in regard to something similar to this. But just in general, I have a question about how any current and like near future expenses that the Assembly might be approving would impact this contract? So that's kind of in general, and then just a continuation of that would be the idea then at what point should the Assembly basically be making that break or drawing that line in terms of approving additional expenses or any kind of expansions to MLMP or any kind of equipment renewals, or at what point are we kind of making the break, and are we messing up any of the contract by doing anything between now and the day when this is all completely finalized?
Through the chair, I think we've given iterations of this answer in the past, but the summary answer is, pursuant to the asset purchase agreement, we agreed to continue to operate the utility in accordance with prudent utility practice until closing, because to the extent you can imagine the practical response of the alternative. If as soon as we signed the APA, we just stopped buying new parts for our utility, it would be pretty run down by the time we tried to sell it, and probably not worth what we paid, what we had Chugach agree to pay for it. So we've agreed to continue to buy the parts it needs and pay for the contracts it needs up until closing. There are gun jumping, so federal antitrust regulations that prohibit us from doing any kind of real coordination of buying or anything prior to close. We aren't really able to to sit down with Chugach and say, okay, we'll buy this, you can buy that, we'll buy the same thing you're buying. That is effectively prohibited by law, that level of coordination. We have been trying to, as a matter of practice, build in termination or assignment provisions more consciously into all contracts that are executed by MLMP or for MLMP prior to close, to make sure that we're not setting up an untenable situation where you've just entered into a 30-year contract with an enormous termination penalty and no ability to assign. So we have tried very consciously to try and create situations which are tenable in light of the impending transaction. But we do have an affirmative obligation to continue to spend money to effectively buy the parts that the utility needs to continue to operate as a whole until we get to the point of closing.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Going back to the amendment on the floor, is there any discussion?
Mr. Chair, I would just say that in this process of the conversation of the Alaska Center for Treatment, the municipality's been spending portions of a $5 million state grant that have been driving this conversation on other topics in other areas. And so this is an issue that is a statewide concern, and it is of value to every resident of Alaska that we have more capacity to serve the behavioral health care needs of our people.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion on the amendment, members may proceed to vote. Ms. Kennedy, how do you vote on the amendment?
Actually, I was going to ask if you would repeat the amendment.
Ms. Kennedy, it would be on the second page of the resolution. It's line 50, just to strike one word, South Central. So instead of residents of South Central Alaska, it would read residents of Alaska.
I vote yes.
That amendment passes 10-1. Any further discussion? Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And it was mentioned earlier in testimony, wondering, was talking about this being a monopoly. And the reason that utilities are monopolies all across the country and have been for a very long period of time, because it makes little sense to have an electric utility or other utility every few blocks in a city for the ratepayers. The cost of whatever the utility produces would be extremely higher than it would be if you had a larger utility. And that's the reason that these monopolies, these utilities, are required to go to the Regulatory Commission of Alaska to get approval for a change in their rates. And I actually, when I was in the legislature on the Energy Committee, around 9 or 10 years ago, we had a presentation that showed what it would look like if they combined all the electric utilities in the rail belt. And when you consider the population of Alaska in the rail belt, maybe it's half a million people, that would be a very small electric utility in the lower 48. And so, there may be future mergers or acquisitions in the future that might benefit additional Alaskans. I think this, and some have said all along that this might be just the first step. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera, and I'll try to be brief, though. I want to first start by thanking the administration and everyone who worked so hard to get us to this point. I know this has been a painstaking negotiation, and thank the other parties for coming to the table and working so closely with us. I wanted to, before we vote, I wanted to quickly respond to the gentleman who claimed there was no public process on this. This is one of the last votes we're probably going to take on this process, not the last, but one of the last, a process that started a long time ago on the utility committee that was chaired by Ms. Quinn Davidson's predecessor, Mr. Steele. We passed a resolution out of that committee that went to the full body. We passed it there, and I believe Mr. Traney, who's in the audience tonight, was the chair of the assembly at that point. Then the administration took up that ball and really ran with it. And I won't go through all the other steps, but we've had multiple ordinances, we've had a public process, we had a public vote of the people even on this. So I really want to push back on the notion there hasn't been public process. My time on the assembly, this has been probably the most important, this has certainly been the most important transaction and probably the most remarkable and transparent process that I've been a part of. It's just gone through many, many, many steps, and the public has been involved the entire way. And we're here tonight, and I want to thank again all the people who worked so hard to get us here. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, members may proceed to vote. Ms. Kennedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
That item passes 11-0. Moving on in our agenda to assembly comments. I will start on this side with Mr. Dyson.
No comment.
Thank you. Mr. Perez-Verdia?
No comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
None for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Just one note. There were some comments made about some things that somebody suggested that I said that were in absolute opposition to the facts, and that recording is available to anybody who would like to listen for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
No comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all who've worked so hard to bring us to this point in the transaction. And also, it's really weird to leave here before midnight.
Motion to extend.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
No comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Salatel?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Whittleton?
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's exciting to have this happen. It's been something thought about and talked about for a long, long time, and thank everybody who's been working on it. It's tremendous.
Thank you. Moving on in our agenda to audience participation. Would anyone like to speak before us? Welcome.
First, I'll start with, my name is Eugene Carl Haberman, and the remarks said by Assemblymember Dunbar at 6:07. In response to said, quote, this was the most transparent process that I have been involved with, quote unquote. That is not true. It's far from it. I showed you evidence to show it. Notice this meeting was yesterday for a public hearing today. Where's the transparency? Start meeting at 5 o'clock. Most of the people leave their work at 5 o'clock. The people, mostly everyone here, were players in this game to get this deal through. That's what's happened. Now I'm going to be talking about something that you're not going to expect me to talk about, but just before that, I'll make a note. School board meetings are still being held the same time as assembly meetings, and next Tuesday there will be a school board meeting. That's, I think, at least number 3, if not 4 times. You need to do something about it. You have the power to do something back and make it impossible for them to do it. Public should not have to choose between going to assembly meeting or a school board meeting. Then now I'm going to speak on an issue like what I have not addressed, Recently in the news, there was discussion, and there's been note, that the governor wants to move prisoners outside the state. I'd like to remind you all, some of you may have been not born at the time, but the court said many years ago to the state that we need to take our prisoners home, where they're in close contact with their family, not in Arizona, not in private locations, outside and distant. This is what's going on. The premise of the state is, and it'd be nice if Assemblyman Zalatow is listening to my comments instead of talking to Assemblymember Dunbar, and Quinn Davison and Perez are listening to my comments and show respect, but that's another game and no respect. But the situation is serious. Yes, there's a state budget crisis, but what we have here is a situation that to save money, we need to send our prisoners outside. That needs to be stopped. It's illegal. Court said that years ago and instructed, and that's why prisons were built in the Matsu Borough, Seward, and elsewhere in the state. It took time to build those prisoners. In the meantime, those people are citizens of Alaska, residents of Alaska, were sent outside, and they had to wait till those prisons were built. Now we got a state budget crisis, and the answer to that is save money and send them outside, where they're going to have away from the necessary contact to deal that they need and support. So I've heard no discussion on that, and then I'd like to make a little note. In closing respect, recently in the news there was concern about the Anchorage Correctional situation and the safety and the beds. It's in the news. I've been at your meetings, and I've heard nothing said by any Assembly members or the administration about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak before us?
I didn't realize we get to go twice. Yeah.
A great public process. Welcome.
Thank you. This is my first time. This is great. So back to fast chargers. I mean, I don't understand why Anchorage doesn't have a fast charger, right? Like everyone's pretty progressive here on the Assembly, I think, and if you look things like trash bags in Wasilla, why do they ban trash bags first, right? If you look at things like a sales tax, they have a sales tax. What is happening? In fact, we're working on putting in a fast charger in Willow. So if you look at things, you would think the Valley is the progressive leader of Alaska. So I think you guys should, take back the leadership role and, install a fast charger in line with the Climate Action Plan, which is, it should be more than words, it should be action. Climate change is real. Combustion engines produce more than half of the greenhouse gases that cause climate change. So there should be no greater cause than installing EV chargers, and it should be fast chargers. And by the way, the difference between a fast charger and a slow charger, it's very important that we have fast chargers because fast chargers allow folks to commute. So it's like torture to charge, like a level 2 charger, what they're installing and giving grants for, it's like dial-up. So like they're installing dial-up internet, we're talking about broadband. And that is what Tesla wants to do. Tesla showed up in Anchorage. And are we going to miss up on the opportunity to have Tesla in Anchorage? Tesla is going to install superchargers in Wasilla because of the demand charges. Just to give you an idea, the demand charge in Anchorage with Chugach and MLP is $20 per kilowatt. The same demand charge in Wasilla is $7 per kilowatt. So it's almost 3 times less. So it will make sense to put a fast charger in Wasilla just on dollars and cents. So when it costs $10,000 for 15 minutes of supercharging or fast charging in Anchorage, it's very hard to make a business case. So what Anchorage is doing by not having a decent demand structure is turning away innovative companies. We're losing business, we're losing exposure. If we want to be a vibrant, elegant city, we should have level 3 charging. And we should have more electric vehicles. So that would be my idea. I hope you all support it. And let's not let Wasilla beat us again, because It just would not be good. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I do have one question for you. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, quick one. So I'm all for it.
Okay, let's do it.
I do wonder, though, how are we going to pay for our roads if we aren't using a motor fuels tax that the federal government uses to fund the Federal Road Trust Fund? How do we pay for our roads if everyone converts? What's the mechanism we're going to tax you to use the road?
I'm sure you guys will think of some tax, or someone will do.
I'm asking you. What do you think we should do? How do we do that? Because it wouldn't be local. This is a national question, but.
I mean, I think there's various vehicles for taxation, right? There's income tax, there's sales taxes. You could have it linked to tire sales, for example. So, I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Would anyone else like to speak before us? Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, real quick, Abused Women Aid in Crisis Awake had a groundbreaking today for their expansion, and 1 in 2 women are going to be abused in their lifetime here in Alaska. 1 in 2, 50%. One thing came up today, talking to one of your other assembly members, massage parlors are kind of on the rise in Anchorage again. Back in the 80s and 90s, I was really involved with the Spenard Action Committee. We closed down about 50 massage parlors in Spenard. They're just places of white slavery. That's all they are. Women are abused there, not on a daily basis, but on an hourly basis. And it's not on the radar for the Anchorage Police Department, from what I understand. Well, it needs to be. If that comes back to what it was back in the 80s, I know some of you remember that are old enough, it was a horrible situation. And we just can't say, well, it's not on our radar. It has to be on our radar. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak before us? Welcome.
Thank you. I wasn't really prepared to say anything, but as others have mentioned, just please consider...
If you could introduce yourself for the record.
Yeah. My name is Bree Xavier, and just really consider your MLA employees and what they've been going through for 2 years now. It's been quite the emotional roller coaster. Sort of a blessing and a curse, in my opinion, that it has been so public. So just please keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
A question, sorry.
Sure, Mr. Weddleton.
Sorry. Well, I guess we don't have a huge amount of time, but tell me more. It seemed to me like it was all pretty straightforward and everybody's got a job when the thing happens, but that doesn't seem to be the...
Well, and I'm sorry, I believe, we do. It's just that, people want concrete information, and it is hard. It's been a hard, long process, and there are a lot of unknowns, and that's been part of the struggle. And some of it you can understand, and I don't know, for some of us, it's just been hard, so. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
I would just offer your future with SAP then is limited, and that should give you some hope.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak before us? Okay, seeing no one, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
We're adjourned.